Welcome to our video series on the basic concepts of Heilkunst medicine. And I will remind you, actually, it's right on the screen here. If you have any questions, please go ahead and type them into the comment box below. If you are watching live, I will be able to answer your question in real time. And if otherwise you're watching this as a replay afterwards, I will come back and find the comments and I will incorporate your questions into future videos. So let me just take this off the screen and I'm going to switch over to my slides. Today's topic is a conclusion from the topic we started last week, and that was, what is a healing reaction? So last week I went over the overall concept of the healing reaction, and this week I'll get more into the practicalities of what you can do about it. If you think you are having a healing reaction from your last remedy, I'll go over some of how you practically can handle that. So just as a quick summary, this is pretty much the whole of last week shoved together into one single slide, just as a refresher. And I'll just read through my points here. All disease, as well as all medicine, operate on a duality of action. And the healing reaction is a positive aspect of treatment, which indicates progress. And that's a differentiation from what we talked about last week. It's not a side effect, and it is also not a homeopathic aggravation, which is a separate concept. So I'm distinguishing the healing reaction as a unique phenomenon, a unique event, and it's actually a positive part of the treatment and things moving in the right direction. And more specifically, the healing reaction represents the law of cure, which takes things in the correct direction. It's the old expression, better out than in, and it's, as I say, the curative direction rather than the suppressive direction. The other main concept we went over last week was that the healing reaction really fits in as one piece of the overall 28-day lunar cycle that the remedy action follows. So typically, or most typically, we have the healing reaction appearing somewhere in the middle, often somewhere in the 10 to 14-day range after the remedy. Could be earlier, could be later, but that's kind of the peak of the bell curve from our general experience. So here is actually an important question, and it is, why are some healing reactions so intense or long-lasting? Now, most healing reactions are relatively mild, or in fact barely even noticeable. This more often than not, a patient will say, after they come back at their 28-day mark, they will often say that, well, they're not sure that anything happened or much of anything happened with the remedy. And that's quite normal, that we have this vast majority, let's say at least 80 to 90%, if not more, of healing reactions are barely noticeable, and they barely make a mark on the person's radar screen. So when they are more intense or long lasting, we do get a very lucid explanation from Dr. Hahnemann as to why that's happening when it does happen. And this is actually for the students of Heilkunst. You'll find this in Hahnemann's Organon as aphorism number 64, for those of you who have that as a reference to look up. But regardless if you don't, the concept is right here, and that is the more intense or long-lasting healing reaction is a function of when our life force is having to overcome a non-natural disease. If in other words, if we are dealing with a more typical natural disease, that's where the healing reaction follows its typical form. It's it's pretty much a non-event, very mild event. But when it comes to a non-natural disease, Hahnemann explains this very clearly, which is that it's basically, when it comes to our innate healing power or our life force, when it's been a non-natural disease, it doesn't have what it can normally draw on, which is, it's basically looking for the opposite state of the disease from kind of the bookshelf of nature, so to speak. It's trying to pull that opposite state off and use it as part of the healing models, so that the life force kind of has a framework or a model as to what it needs to restore as far as the healing reaction goes. So as I say, that's the normal case in a natural disease, but in a non-natural disease, that doesn't exist. So effectively what has to happen is the life force kind of through almost a violence, or almost like a very forceful action. It has to force that healing to go through without any guidance or model. So it's kind of like the life force has to invent that, so to speak. And the analogy I've often used when I'm explaining that is, imagine if you took your car into the mechanic, because something needed to be fixed, some part needed to be replaced or something. And let's take two different cases. Let's say that in one case, you have a very common car, something that's very popular, and is very, let's say, like a Honda Civic. You see thousands of these. They're all over the place. And from a mechanic's point of view, they've done whatever your given repair is. They've done that thousands of times. And they will likely have that part in stock. So in that situation, the mechanic just simply needs to reach back into their storeroom, get that part, and replace it in your car, and away you go. You can even have been sitting in the waiting room for 15 minutes, and your car is ready, and then off you go. You go about your day. But in the second case, imagine if you're driving a car that is very unusual. Let's say it's some rare import, or a car that was only maybe only 1,000 of them were produced originally. So it's rare. The parts are rare, and in fact, your mechanic cannot order this. They kind of know what the part is, but it's simply unavailable. So in that case, if they want to fix your car, they're going to need to create that part themselves from scratch. They're going to have to take out their welding torch and some metal, some other basic parts. They're going to have to craft that part from scratch, as if they're inventing it for the first time. So in that case, they have to send you off home in a borrowed car, and you have to come back a couple of weeks later, because this is going to be quite an operation. So I'm using this as an analogy when it comes to the intense healing reaction. Imagine something like that happening. There is no part available to take off the shelf of nature, but your life force kind of has to invent it as it goes. So that's where more of the intense energies, even some of the violence, can come out of some of those healing reactions. So now, as I said, that's a much more rare case, for there to be a more dramatic healing reaction. But it definitely is something to keep in mind, especially as we're working through the timeline and we're dealing with any of the non-natural diseases. And as I note here on the slide, that category generally includes what we call the iatrogenic diseases, diseases which are caused by a drug, by a pharmaceutical drug that created a certain state of disease in the organism. The other example is what we call the ideogenic, which includes some of the major emotional shocks, or also false beliefs. So when we get into these non-natural diseases, that's where we really kind of need to be more on the alert. And we're gonna get into that in a minute, what we can start to do to support somebody through a healing reaction. So that is the practical question somebody may be asking themselves, a week or so after they've taken their remedy. Is this a healing reaction? Is what I'm going through right now, is it a healing reaction? Some people, as we said last week, they often mistake it for a side effect if they don't know the difference, or they don't understand the difference. And really what we're looking for is what you're going through, does it fit into the framework that I just outlined a couple of slides above? And as well, we went into great detail last week. You can review that slide. And some of the more basic questions we can boil that down to is, does it take on the form of some kind of discharge? Is something moving from the inside out? Is your nose running? Are you going to the bathroom with runny stool, or more frequently in general? In other words, in one way or the other, is your body pushing stuff out? The other general framework you can look at, or question you can ask, is, did these symptoms, what I think may or may not be a healing reaction, did that start somewhere in the middle of the 28-day cycle since the last remedy I took? So if you're somewhere in that 10, 12, 14-day mark, even 15, 18 days, somewhere in that middle zone, then yeah, that's another big check mark, or a big clue that you are likely in the middle of a healing reaction. And another really interesting part, again, because the healing reaction is an inside-out phenomenon, it's whatever disease has been at the core is now being pushed out. So by definition, this is very interesting. Even if somebody's healing reactions, their discharge symptoms may be more intense, for a period of time. That's all happening kind of on the outside. But what's kind of almost paradoxical is on the inside, they may feel exceedingly well. It's almost like they have clarity of mind and they're feeling really positive, they're feeling happy, despite the fact that all these symptoms are happening. Now, normally, let's say if somebody had a cold or, had some kind of infection, had an actual disease process going on, they wouldn't feel that good at the core. They would have all the symptoms and they would feel like crap on the inside. So that's another big clue is, those symptoms may be happening, which might look like a cold or some other kind of disease process, but in fact, it's not because of that inside out action. As I say, you feel great at the core, even though you look like a mess on the outside. So that's another big clue in the framework. So some of the general principles when it comes to supporting yourself through a healing reaction, the first, as we just said in the previous slide, we answered that question, is this a healing reaction? And as I alluded to already, you're trying to differentiate, is it actually a healing reaction or is it an actual disease going on? And again, based on the frameworks, based on the clues, you can start to sort that out. If you're still not sure, of course, come back to your Heilkunst practitioner, the one where you just got the remedy from, and they will help sort these things out for you, as well as some of the things in the following slides, some of the support measures that they can guide you with as well. The big point here as well, a healing reaction is the activity of your life force in cleanup mode after the medicine has cured the disease. So that's going back to our concept of duality. The first action belonging to the medicine. It cures the disease. And then the after action or the healing reaction is really belonging to your life force. It's busy cleaning things up, pushing toxins out that don't belong. It's really doing the great big spring cleanup, so to speak. The other general principle you want to follow is to support your healing reaction in the correct direction. Again, being an inside-out phenomena, you want to follow that direction. So you want to, as I say here on the slide, you want to use suppressive medicine as little as possible, as sparingly as possible. So, people's inclinations are to run to the doctor and get cortisone cream for a skin rash or to get an antibiotic for a so-called infection. Well, these things, they're not a disease, they're not an actual infection. So those are the wrong medicines at the wrong time. Sometimes an antibiotic is necessary, but generally not for a healing reaction. So that's the big general principle. You want to support that inside-out direction. The proper I'll get to this in the future slides here, but the proper mode of direction from the inside out and not from the outside in, which would just basically reactivate the disease back to its former status, and you'd kind of be working against what we're doing with the remedies and what your life force is doing with the healing reaction. So again, back to our very broad framework in Heilkunst, if you remember this, we have the three broad jurisdictions. We have the therapeutic regimen, the therapeutic medicine, and then the therapeutic education. So when it comes to a healing reaction, you need that framework in mind at what level you're wanting to support the person at. So at the level of regimen, I just have a few basic suggestions here. Get good rest and rejuvenation, go to bed early, take time off from work if you can, etc. All the things like same thing when we get a cold or a fever or something, we just kind of want to stay home and stay in bed, kind of support ourselves, give ourselves 24 or 48 hours to get back on our feet again. All that good basic common sense applies here. A little more specifically, I say all forms of drainage and detox, such as lymphatic drainage massage, juice fasting, things of that nature. Or the third point, homeopathic drainage formula, which is usually fairly standard fare. We supply that along with your timeline treatment. That will help with what's going on in a healing reaction. That's part of the whole purpose of it as well. When it comes to providing support as far as homeopathic medicine, and by the way, I just want to point something out on the last slide. I have this here, the homeopathic drainage formula. You may be wondering, why did I put that on the regimen slide instead of the medicine slide? And yes, although technically it's a homeopathic medicine, it's behaving in the jurisdiction of regimen. So it's not so much what the thing is that you're using for support, but it's how it acts, what kind of activity that it supports. So in this case, the homeopathic drainage formula, technically, it's supporting that regimen function or that rebalancing function. So back to the medicine slide. So the other general thing we would recommend when somebody's in a healing reaction is to take the daily support dropper that we supply in every treatment plan, and instead of your usual dose, which is usually 1 drop per day, during the healing reaction, we advise that that be taken on a more frequent basis. And the best way to do that is to take that 1 drop, which would be your standard dose for the day, put that in a glass of water or a bottle of water, and you can just keep sipping on that. Every few hours, every few minutes, you can kind of have a certain frequency of that, which matches the frequency of or the intensity of your healing reaction, and that your support dropper is going to kind of help expedite the whole process and get you to the other side more easily and with kind of less stress and less intensity on the other end of it. And in even more intense healing reactions, and kind of like what I was alluding to from Hahnemann's aphorism 64, where there's a more intense reaction sometimes, there does come a time and a place where we do need to prescribe a brand new remedy on top of the whole situation, to further focus in on whatever has come out of that healing reaction. Where, as I say, in some of the more intense situations, the life force will actually take part in generating a brand new disease on top of it all. So, as I say, that's relatively rare, but when it does happen, of course, we can add that layer of help as well. So that, just so you know, that's on the level of medicine. That's that's a further support. And the third jurisdiction, what we call the therapeutic education, when we really want to get, as always in life and our health and going forward in things, we always want to get more and more into understanding the true meaning of things. Of course, the true meaning of our own life, who we're supposed to be, what kind of work we're supposed to do, what kind of life we're supposed to be living, all these kind of personal truths. And of course, we're also going to be tapping into the general truths. What are the truths of life in the universe, and how society works, how interrelationships work. There's a lot more general truths, even, of course, some of the kinds of things we talk about healing reactions, about how remedies works. Those are some of the truths of the universe, as it were. And more specifically into the healing reaction, as far as this jurisdiction goes, when you're going through a healing reaction, that's kind of the ultimate job you have, is to really understand what is the meaning of this healing reaction. What is the lesson that I'm learning here? And I just made up an example here. Let's say you have a healing reaction that involves an intense sore throat. Well, that could very likely be related to an issue, your body kind of telling you, yeah, this is about you learning that, this is it's time that you start to speak up for yourself, basically. That can be the lesson that the physical healing reaction is showing you. As I say, that's one simple example, but you can use your imagination to see how that may apply to any number of physical symptoms and how the body speaks this kind of symbolic language, through all these different symptoms and body parts. The other half of this is finding some form of suitable expression for whatever the issue is coming up. So that could be anything informal, such as some kind of self-support through journaling, or finding a conversation partner, in your life partner or a close friend or something like that. Or you can bring it up a level to a more formal counseling, whether that's with your Heilkunst practitioner or some other form of formal talk therapy. Someone who's trained in some form of psychotherapy or some kind of healative talk modality. So that's really brings us to the conclusion of what's going on with the healing reaction and how you can support it. Again, as I said at the beginning, I'm happy to entertain any questions related to this topic, or, as I said earlier, if you are watching this after the fact as a replay, I'll certainly be seeing the comments later on, and I will incorporate your questions into a future video. So I will just stay on screen just for half a minute or so. I know there's a delay between, oops, and I meant to come on screen. Where did I go? Here. Nope. Yeah, that's me. Hello. I'll stay on screen. If someone is typing, you'll have time to get your comments in. Otherwise, I will be watching for comments after the fact, and I will be bringing those topics into future videos. So thank you for joining me today, and in a moment I will be ending this video.